It's about time for our newspaper review segment. We'll be taking a look at the national dailies and, the headlines that are making the papers this morning. And of course, we have our guest reviewer, as always, Dr. Dan Eheraifo, who is the HOD Mass Communications Department at the University of Benin. A wonderful morning to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll be taking our papers now, and the first point of call is the Daily Trust newspaper. We'll look at the headlines there. The major headline right there, which you can see, is schools resume amid biting economy. Also on Daily Trust newspaper, we'll see up ahead there, gunmen killed 23 in Katsina, Kaduna, Plateau, Kwara, Niger. And of course, you get to get a grasp of that on page 6. Moving over to the bottom of Daily Trust newspaper, a sub-headline there is how Boko Haram killed 63 in Borno, says survivors. Of course, you get to see that one on page 5. Also on Daily Trust, workers to federal government, 70,000 naira minimum wage insufficient, on page 32. You also have fuel scarcity looms as tanker drivers begin strike today. That one is on page 7. Also on Daily Trust newspaper, federal government threatens X over anti-Tinubu post, Shore vows resistance. And those are the stories that are making the headlines on Daily Trust newspaper. And now we'll move over to Dr. Dan for his insights on this particular paper. Dr. Dan, over to you.
Well, we have a plethora of stories there.
Well, I think we've encountered a technical hitch right there. But hopefully we'll come back to him and he'd be able to give his insights on this and other papers that we'll be taking. So really quickly, let's go on to the next paper. But before we do, though, I think he's back on. So let's get his insights on the Daily Trust newspaper. Dr. Dan, you're back on.
Yes, I was saying that the reason why things are biting hard for parents. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
The reason why things are biting hard for parents, if you look at what is happening, many state governors have increased the tax that schools pay to the government. And once the government increases such a tax, the implication is that school proprietors will increase school fees. And the whole thing will fall back on parents. That is what informed that headline. Generally, the economy is not too palatable for anybody, but the reality is that the economy is biting hard on parents. And as school resumes, those who have 1, 2, 3 children in school are struggling on how to pay fees. It's a big challenge for us. But on these headlines, the most touching aspect is the killing spree across the country. From the headlines, 63 in Borno State, Plateau, Niger, Kano. The implication of all of this is that our talk about security, the assurances from the National Security Advisor that security is beginning to stabilize in the country is not what we are getting from the report from the weekend. What is obvious here is that the security agencies need to double their game and ensure that Nigeria is safe for all of us. If you follow what happened even in Edo State here last week, we had the story of about 29 persons kidnapped and 16 have been released. So what it suggests is that we still have a lot of ungoverned spaces where some of these criminal elements take advantage of the free space to operate freely without hinder. The security agencies need to wake up and ensure that the lives of Nigerians are protected.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Dan, on your analysis on Daily Trust. We'll now move over to our next daily, which would be taking a look at the major headlines this morning. We'll look at the Daily Times, which major headline we get to see there. Fuel crisis imminent as NUPENG begins strike today. Shuns federal government plea. On page 8, you get a grasp of that major headline. Also, as a sub-headline at the front page of the Daily Times, UN Ndume condemned killing of 63 by Boko Haram in Borno State. That one is on page 9. On page 2, it says Customs approves $300 duty-free threshold for low-value imports. On page 12 of the Daily Times, church invasion, prove you're not terrorist organization, ADC challenges APC. Also on the Daily Times, young pilots, engineers lack opportunities in Nigeria, NAAPE president says. And that one is on page 6. Just below those headlines says NDLEA dismantles international drug cartel, intercepts narcotics worth over 6.4 billion naira. And those headlines are on the Daily Times. Also, on page 11 of the Daily Times, you get to see Nigeria's annual post-harvest losses hits 3.5 trillion naira. And this is said by the Agric Minister. And now we'll move over to our guest reviewer, Dr. Dan, for your insightful analysis on these headlines.
Headline from the Daily Times is this trendy story that NUPENG is going to begin their strike today. What is responsible for this strike is simply because Dangote Industry has decided to import about 4,000 trucks to aid the supply of petrol across the country. The worrisome aspect from NUPENG is that the drivers from these company will not be allowed to join the union. This is the crux of the matter. If you look at our labor law, you say when you have employment of over 20, such people are free to unionize. So if union members are not allowed, if drivers are not allowed to join their union, the implication is that they will work at the whims and caprices of the man.
Well, another technical hitch, but hopefully with time we'll be able to get Dr. Dan back on. Of course, he was talking about the monopolization by the Dangote, or the alleged monopolization by the Dangote as alleged by NUPENG. He's back on air. Let's get to continue hearing his insights. Dr. Dan.
I was saying that what the Labor Ministry needs to do is to call Dangote Industry and NUPEG to a meeting where the laws will be presented to both parties on the way out of it. The grandstanding, either by Dangote or NUPEG, is not the solution. But I know where the fear is. If you have a big organization as big as Dangote and you don't allow unionization, the implication is that the company can wake up in the morning and say this is what they want. But again, this is a private business where the man is interested in profit. So we want to ask the question, how do we draw the line between profit and social responsibility? If you are conversant with the labor practice in Nigeria, where casualization is the order of the day, workers are used without appropriate benefit for such people. But when you have a union, it will provide a leeway for such workers. So the labor ministry needs to do a lot in this regard. Having said that, the other major take from the headlines about ADC complaining about APC is part of our political culture. We are yet to grow to the level where we tolerate opposition. Those who are in government now, years back were in serious opposition to President Goodluck Jonathan. All manners of things were said against that president. But if you look at what the state governors are doing in those states where ADC is trying to take root, the orgies of violence you have seen, we are not ready for true democracy. The hallmark of a democracy is the capacity of people to make choice as to what they want within the system. So if we don't give people alternative, if we don't allow alternative viewpoint, we cannot deepen our governance process. So INEC needs to read the Riot Act, even to those parties whose agents are fingered in these cases of violence. But one of the questions you should ask yourself is, where was the police when all this violence are going on? What we have seen so far is that the police is in connivance with the ruling party in ensuring that ADC does not have its way in many places where they have organized either meetings or rallies. The case of what happened in Lagos is a clear case of the police in cahoot uh, uh, with APC to ensure that ADC does not take root. This is not good for our democratic culture. We should allow opposition have their say and let the people decide on which party they want to follow as far as the elections are concerned. The last aspect I will talk about from your headlines is in relation to the complaint by the pilot body that there are no opportunities in Nigeria. The question is, when people don't have the buying power, why will people fly? It is those who have resources that can fly. If you look at the ratio of those who have the capacity to fly, they are very few. So until we deepen the economy, where people will take air transport as alternative, then airlines can increase their fleet, and they will now have an alternative for employing pilots who will take a shift to ensure that passengers enjoy uninterrupted flights. But as far as the economy remains like this, and only few can afford the cost of air flights, the opportunities that many young pilots are dreaming about may not come. Thank you.
All right, thank you also, Dr. Dan. Now we'll move over to our next point of call, the Punch newspapers. Let's see what the major headlines are saying right there on the Punch. Well, we get to see union insists on strike, meets federal government, others today. And that one is on page 21. Just below it, you also get to see Labour Minister begs union to shelve industrial action. Marketers vow to shut filling stations back NUPENG. We also see on page 14 of the Punch newspaper, Natasha to resume Senate after London trip, says lawyer. Also on the Punch, on page 23, Naira strengthens to 1,514 per dollar, nears 5-month high. Also on the Punch newspaper there, Accountant General plots to preempt Supreme Court set to pay Osun local government funds to court-sacked APC chairman, councillors. Nulge cries out. You get to see the details of that particular story on page 9. Now, these are the stories that are at the front page of the Punch newspaper. Dr. Dan, really quickly, your insights.
The major headline was what I talked about earlier, that the minister need to sit both parties to a roundtable to discuss the issue. But let's take a cue from the allegation that the Accountant General was trying to influence the Supreme Court. When you hear stories of this nature, it tells a lot about uh, the transaction that takes place in our justice system. One question we should ask ourselves is, if the Supreme Court reads the law, why will somebody wants to influence the court to decide who should get what and who should not? The challenge with the Nigeria system, as alleged by many commentators, is that we have become transactional when it comes to our justice system, and we cannot build an ideal society, a society that all of us will be proud of, if things of this nature continue. It also suggests that the management of Punch have an idea, or maybe an insider into that story. So one question we should ask ourselves is this what we want for our democratic culture? I rest it at that level for those in the judicial sector to ask themselves if this is what the type of society we want. If we allow political influence to always decide what type of judgments are given in our courts, we may not get to that level what will build the society that our children can enjoy. So it suggests, therefore, that some of the judgments we get from our courts, they are product of political influence or they are purely transactional. If that allegation is true, what we need to do as a people is to insist on what is right, is to insist that those in the temple of justice follow the rule of law. With that, we will begin to have a semblance of the people who are ready for change. Having said that, if we build more on the Dangote NUPENG issue, why would the government be begging the union not to go on strike? Does the union have a right to call for a strike if the rights of their members are breached? This is a question the ministry has not answered. Rather, the ministry is resorting to plea to avert the crisis. Before today, the issue has been going on, letters have been written and assumed, and government did not do anything about it. It tells you a lot about the attitude of those in government cycle to union cries, especially where marginalization issues are talked about. Uh, Akpoti Uduaga's case is coming to an end gradually with the planned resumption. But one of the things I want our political leaders to remember or think about always, power is held in trust and is very ephemeral. Years ago, we had people who thought this country belongs to them. But the reality today is that they're out of power. So the man who sits either as the Senate president
The
and the political supporter, his political supporters who feel this is the best way to go. The 6 months is very close. I believe when the Senate resumes, that issue will be laid to rest. But we should always think about the implication of our actions, how short life is, and even the influence we wield, how short it is. If you are a chief executive of an organization, you are a political leader, a governor, whatever position you hold, and you assume that it's a lifetime investment that you will not leave. That is a big lie. We are humans, and life has taught all of us that it is very short. So those who political power should realize that power is held in trust, and if it is not used well, tomorrow the legacies about our positions in office will speak. And if we use it for the good of the people, tomorrow people will talk about us. And when we're in office, this is what we did. I think when political leaders start thinking in this direction, some of the unnecessary fights that they engage in most of the time will not be necessary. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Dan. Now we'll move over to environmental matters, looking at the major headlines on the Nature newspapers. All right, there on Nature newspapers, on page 3, you get to see Montreal Protocol action. Nigeria phases out harmful gas, adopts climate-friendly agents. Also on Nature News, you get to see climate change tops public concerns on deforestation impact. And that one is on page 6. Also, Governor Ududu prioritizes environment issues to combat erosion menace on page 6. Also on Nature News, a headline there staying on page 6 is flood forces closure of 40-year-old Friday Mosque in Katsina State. On page 7, you see NSCDC joint security forces foil attacks on plateau farmers. On page 15, United Nylon Association launches plastic waste cleanup in Lagos. Also on Nature News, on page 20, Sanwo-Olu congratulates Team Lagos for winning 9th National Youth Games. If we do get to go up a little bit on nature news, you see on page 3, anxiety as Kanu's Tiga Dam reaches critical capacity level, which is also very alarming. But let's get to know your insights on these headlines, Dr. Dan.
Yes, I recall when I was schooling in Delta State, there was a community where there were complaints of people having a particular ailment as a result of gas flaring in Delta State, around the Isoko area of the state. And I asked my lecturer friend there who was in the Department of Microbiology, who was from that area. And he said to me, government was not walking the talk. As at that time, government had signed the gas flaring deal with oil companies with a stipulated period that after, was it 2008, now if I'm not mistaken, or before then, that the issue of gas flaring should stop. But government did not do uh, what was needful in that sense. And the issue has continued till date. What you find in many of these in many of these host communities, you have a situation where their crops, their source of livelihood are affected as a result of perpetual gas flaring in those environments. So the government says they are ready to adopt the right protocol so that harmful gases can be reduced. It will give assurance to the upcoming generation that what some of their parents suffered, they will not suffer the same. Having said that, the issue of climate change is real. Those who have been doubting climate change, with the increasing rate of flooding in our environment, and even in states where such things were not common before, it should tell us clearly that climate change is real. I will appeal to the government to look at that cannot dam issue critically before it becomes a disaster. What does the government need to do? If the dam is overflooded, if there is a need to open the dam so that water can start flowing gradually, it is best to do that now. You know what happened in Meduguri last year, the last 2 years, is that those signals were there, but those who were in positions to take that action did not do the needful until the waters came in its force and broke it down, and there was massive destruction of lives and properties. So the Kano state government, or whether it's the federal government agency that is in charge of that dam, should take immediate steps to ensure that the dam is opened up so that the amount of water can start flowing now to reduce disaster. We have had cases of so much flooding all over the country. And most of the time when you hear these cases of flooding, we take reactive steps. But before the rains come in its large volumes, what you expect the government to do is to take steps to ensure that these issues are addressed. But most of the time, government does not act until when it becomes obvious that lives and properties will be destroyed as a result of that. So, what culture should we abide, or should we exhibit when it comes to environmental management? What the landlord associations have done in Lagos is a good one, but like the example the Lagos State has provided, the issue of styrophones, nylon papers have been banned in Lagos so that they can have an environment that is sustainable. I expect other state governors to start thinking in that direction so that you have products that are recyclable and you have environment that are beautiful. Anytime I travel to states like uh, Cross River, Akwa Ibom, where you see the level of cleanness of the city, you start asking yourself, what is wrong with other states? Why can't we do the same to ensure cleaner environment? The last thing I will say about the environmental news or nature news is that those who are into logging of woods, if you grow up either in this city of Benin, Delta State, especially in places like Saple, you realize that up to the late 90s, the type of wood that these people were logging were very mighty woods. But today you see very tiny woods as what the lobbers will bring from the bush, and I'll be asking myself, why would they allow it grow? The government that ought to monitor these forest areas, ensure that even when trees are felled, they are replanted, is not serious about the forest zone. What they do most of the time is to appoint some of their political agents as chairman of the forest committee. And those guys allow all manners of wood to be felled without caution to the loggers. I traveled to Cameroon early this year or so. And if you see the type of wood size you will see around the southern part of Cameroon, you'll be asking yourself, are this type of wood still available? Why don't we allow our forests to grow? If we allow our forests to grow well, we'll have the right size of woods for logging. And when woods are logged, government should encourage the replanting of such trees, economic trees, so that tomorrow we can have a sustainable environmental culture. But this idea of just cutting everything and with road shows to organize tree planting is not good for our society. It should be a deliberate effort. What you see most of the time when we talk about environmental protection against the ozone depletion, government organizes tree planting, maybe around the government area, things where they say it's symbolic. What is happening in our forest? What is happening around our streets? Why can't we make it beautiful? Why would local government make it a deliberate policy that every year they will plant up to 1,000 trees, either within the city center or within the village?
Well, we do have a slight technical glitch, but we'll come back to Dr. Dan. Of course, he was reviewing nature news and the headlines there, but let's move over to the Nation newspaper. And from the Nation newspaper, we'll get to also have his analysis on that particular paper. The headlines on the Nation newspaper there's a lot of business headlines which you get to see on the top of the Nation newspaper. On page 2, you see Naira rallies on sustained forex growth. Reserves hit $41.5 billion. Also on the Nation newspapers, United Airlines acquires 6 Boeing 737 to 800 aircraft. So that one is on page 4. Blackout enters 2 weeks in parts of Benin, and that one is on page 6. A major headline there on the Nation says troops hit terrorists in nationwide crackdown, further explaining bandits' commanders, others killed, woman terror suspects arrested, victims rescued. Also on the Nation, new customs duty exemption rates takes off, and that one is on page 19. On page 4, you see Minister to meet NUPENG, others. Also on Nation, no need for strike during talks, Education Minister tells ASU and ASUP. Also on the Nation, Cardoso, why CBN will sustain monetary tightening policy. On the Nation also, stemming from page 5, INEC's recognition of Gabam-led EXCO throws SDP into confusion. Let's get your insights, Dr. Dan, on the Nation. And sorry to have caught you there while you were analyzing the nature news.
Yes, if you look at this headline, it's totally different from what you have from other headlines in terms of the terrorist attack in Borno, Plateau. You may not understand the reason behind this. If you look at the influence of ownership in terms of how stories are framed, you don't expect anything less from the Nation newspaper. Uh, it's a good development that the Nation newspaper reported that the Ministry of Defense or the military succeeded in eliminating some of the terrorists. But the question is, those large number of, if you put the figures of those who were killed over the weekend together, that is almost over 100. How can that number of lives be lost as a result of insecurity again and again? Sometimes when I see it, I ask myself, are these terrorists living in ghost towns? Are they not within the territories of Nigeria? What is happening to intelligence? How much are we doing to stem this tide? Sometimes when you read media reports or briefing from the defense headquarters, you will hear that, oh, they took very drastic action or they worked on intelligence to nap some of these activities. So in all those other places where such attacks took place unhindered, you ask yourself, what happened to security? Is what we have not addressed. It's a cherry development from the CBN about stabilizing the naira. The economy is beginning to be stable. It should not be in books because the buying power of the naira is the ability of the poor man on the street to walk into the market and get something substantial. Between the time the president took over and now, if you consider at the time the president took over, the exchange was about 400 or 500 something naira, and now that is 1,000 naira. That is a very wide gap. So when the government says they are stabilizing the economy, the capacity of the citizens to raise their earnings to this level is what makes the economy sustainable. So if the level of economic activities do not translate to improved standard of living for the people, the so-called talk about stabilization will remain more of bookwork than the reality on ground. Lastly, I will look at what the Minister of Education has said about ASU and ASUP strike. That once there is a meeting, there is no point talking about strike. Government is fond of using the same tactics again and again to address issues. Let's look at just three of the issues that are before the unions presented before government. Government increased or what you call wage award to the lecturers in 35% to 26 for the non-teaching staff. Over a year now, that money has not been paid. So what is the excuse of government? And you don't want the union to go on strike. So we are very good at talking, but we don't do the right thing. So the union officials know what to do to hold the government accountable, but the government on its part should come clean when it's negotiating with union members on how to reach agreements about issues. This is what we have been doing over the years, the same cycle of thinking again and again. Sometimes I ask myself if indeed we are ready for development. Thank you.
All right, still reviewing our national dailies here. We get to move on to Daily Sun. The major headline is on the 2027 elections. It says Jonathan presses on with election plans, and it goes on to further give insights to that. It says ignores wife's disapproval, directs foot soldiers in PDP to clean house. It also goes on to say supporters hold secret meetings outside Nigeria. And of course, that one is seen on page 6. Over at the top on Daily Sun newspapers, no retreats till federal government reviews 70,000 naira minimum wage. And that one is said by NLC, which vows to mount more pressure. You get more information about that on page 26. Also, federal government pleads as NUPENG, IPMAN, others halt operations today over rifts with Dangote refinery. Staying with Daily Sun, you see Cross River secures hosts' rights for Intra-African Trade Fair 2026. Also on page 26, United Nigeria Airlines seals B737-800 deal with Southwest Airlines. That story is seen on page 2. Also, kudos knock trail ban on extravagant graduation parties in basic schools. That one is on page 26 also. And these are some of the stories that are making the headlines on Daily Sun. Let's have your takes on this, Dr. Dan.
Well, we begin with the bold headlines that Jonathan presses on with election plans. Uh, Jonathan was a former president. If you look at many of his close associates, some of them are in the ruling party, some of them are out of government. But if Jonathan decides to contest, it is his right. But I know he knows that the way the system is, those who are asking him to go on, some are interested in the money in his pocket because that is the language of politicians. Those who lost out of this current government and they find the personality of Jonathan as an alternative, we work in this direction. We've read stories of some of the meetings in Niger State and other strategic locations in the country about the possibility of the man contesting for president. If the wife says he should not contest, I think we may end up at that level. But let's watch how it unfolds because 2027 is still far. The consultations will continue. It is when it is clear, it is obvious that if he contests, he can win. I think that is when he will put his hand totally to the ring. We wait to see how that plays out because politicians like to fly kites with the hope that people will buy into them. Let's see what happens as the year rolls out and we'll wait the coming year. Uh, the last thing I will talk about, I know your time is almost gone. The last thing I will talk about is the issue of the ban of flamboyant parties in nursery or primary school, secondary school, in many universities. For those who don't know, if you if you if you visited the campuses, some of the secondary school where students will be doing their final parties, you'll be asking yourself, is graduation not the collection of certificates, not convocation? And many young people abuse the privileges. Some of the immoral things they do openly in the name of graduation, the way money is abused, or the show of opulence when the persons are actually very poor. These are some students who have not paid their fees. And they will come and be telling the world that they have money, they have graduated. Some of them, they are not academically strong. And some of the vices that come out of these graduations has been a thing of public concern. In our school here, the management took decision long ago that that should stop. Many state governors have bought into this idea. That is the right way to go. In civilized societies, it is the day of your convocation that you do celebration, not the day you end your exam. Because any exam is not a guarantee that you pass all your papers. And for a child that is just leaving primary school, why should we decorate the child with so much fanfare such that they start feeling that he has conquered everything when it's just the starting point? For the governors that have taken this step, it's good for our society. It will help parents to start thinking about what should be their priorities instead of this show of opulence that has nothing to do with the values that guide us. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you also, Dr. Dan Ekarafu, HOD Mass Communication at the University of Benin, for your very insightful analysis on our national dailies. And here we come to the end of our newspaper review segment on TMI this morning.